She thought signing a marriage certificate with the city's most dangerous man would save her life. It was just a business transaction, until the stolen kisses, the midnight confessions, and the rainy evening his supposedly dead fiancée walked through their front door, holding a secret that would burn their world down. The mahogany doors of the Long Island estate were heavy enough to trap a soul, and as they clicked shut behind Nora Mitchell, she knew she had just locked herself in a cage. Nora was a 26-year-old archivist working at a midtown library, a woman who lived her life in the quiet, dusty corners of history. She had no business standing in the private study of Dominic Russo, the undisputed head of the East Coast Syndicate. But her father, William Mitchell, had an unforgivable vice. He had gambled away $800,000 he didn't have, placing the debt squarely in the hands of men who did not send collection letters. They sent body bags. Dominic Russo stood by a massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Atlantic. He didn't look like a mob boss from the movies. There were no flashy rings or cheap suits. Dominic wore a bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit that hugged his broad shoulders, his dark hair neatly swept back, and his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He was 32, ruthlessly handsome, and utterly terrifying. "Miss Mitchell," Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't turn around immediately. "Your father has placed you in a very unfortunate position." "I don't have the money," Nora said, her voice trembling despite her desperate attempt to keep it steady. "But I will pay it back. Garnish my wages. Take my apartment." Dominic finally turned. His eyes were a piercing, cold slate grey. He walked toward his massive oak desk, picked up a thick file, and tossed it onto the polished wood. "It would take you 4 lifetimes on an archivist's salary to pay off your father's debt." "I am a businessman, Nora. I do not deal in lifetimes. I deal in the present." He leaned against the edge of the desk, crossing his arms. "I don't want your money. I want you." Nora's breath hitched, her mind instantly jumping to the darkest, most horrific conclusions. She took a step back, her hand gripping the strap of her cheap canvas tote bag. "I'm not that kind of woman." A dark, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. "And I am not a trafficker. Sit down." When she hesitated, his eyes narrowed, the temperature in the room dropping 10 degrees. She sat in the leather chair opposite him. "I am currently restructuring my family's assets," Dominic explained, pouring a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "I am pushing into legitimate real estate and international shipping. But the State Port Authority and the federal regulators are stalling my contracts. They see me as a liability, a loose cannon. The traditional heads of the 5 families, specifically Old Man Carmine, think I'm too untethered. They want me settled. They want me married to a clean, respectable, entirely civilian woman." Nora stared at him, the absurdity of the situation washing over her. "You want me to be your wife?" "I want you to be my wife on paper and in public," Dominic corrected. "A 1-year contract. You will live in my penthouse. You will attend galas, smile for the cameras, and play the role of the devoted, innocent woman who tamed the beast. In exchange, your father's debt is wiped clean today. And when the year is up, we file for a quiet, irreconcilable differences divorce, and you walk away with $2 million in an offshore trust." He slid a heavy, cream-colored document across the desk. Next to it, he placed a gold Mont Blanc pen. "My lawyer, James O'Connell, drafted this," Dominic continued. "It is ironclad. You will be safe. No one in my world will touch you, because to touch my wife is a death sentence. But you must never ask questions about my business, and you must never, under any circumstances, betray me." Nora looked down at the contract. Her father was currently sitting in a basement in Queens, waiting for a bullet. If she walked out that door, William Mitchell was dead. If she signed, she was selling her soul to the devil. But $2 million? A clean slate? "What happens if I say no?" she whispered. Dominic leaned forward, his face inches from hers. "Then I make a phone call to Louis Vitiello, and your father's body is found in the East River by morning. It's a simple choice, Nora." Her hand shook as she picked up the pen. She didn't read the fine print. She didn't look at the clauses. She simply signed her name on the dotted line, anchoring her fate to a man who ruled the criminal underworld. "Good girl," Dominic murmured, taking the paper. "Pack your things. The wedding is in 3 days." The wedding was a spectacular, suffocating affair. It took place at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the pews packed with a terrifying mix of high society politicians and notorious underworld figures. Nora wore a breathtaking Vera Wang gown of imported Italian lace, her face veiled, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When Dominic took her hand at the altar, his grip was firm, almost grounding. He looked at her with an intensity that made the massive cathedral feel entirely empty. When the priest told him to kiss the bride, Dominic lifted her veil. He didn't offer a polite peck. His hand slid to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, and he kissed her with a slow, possessive heat that made the cameras flash wildly and Nora's knees go weak. It was a performance, she reminded herself. Just a performance. But as the weeks bled into months inside Dominic's sprawling Fifth Avenue penthouse, the lines of the contract began to blur. Nora had expected a cold, cruel roommate. Instead, she found a man of intense, silent contradictions. Dominic was ruthless during the day, holding meetings in his office with men who looked like they killed for sport. But at night, the penthouse was quiet. He would find her in the private library, reading by the fire, and he would simply sit in the armchair opposite her, drinking his scotch, shedding the weight of his violent empire. He remembered her coffee order. He replaced her worn-out winter coat with a cashmere one, not as a lavish gift, but leaving it quietly over her chair with a note that said, "It's freezing outside." The real shift happened in their 4th month of marriage. They were attending a charity gala at the Pierre Hotel. Nora was wearing a backless emerald gown, playing her part flawlessly, laughing at the jokes of city councilmen while Dominic stood by her side, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. Suddenly, a disturbance rippled through the ballroom. A man from a rival faction, the Moretti family, had bypassed security. He lunged through the crowd, pulling a blade, aiming straight for Dominic's blind side. Nora gasped, stepping back, but before she could process the danger, Dominic moved with lethal speed. He shoved Nora violently behind him, shielding her completely with his body. In one fluid, brutal motion, Dominic disarmed the attacker, snapping the man's wrist and driving him into the marble floor until his security team swarmed them. The ballroom erupted into chaos, but Dominic ignored the blood on his knuckles. He turned frantically to Nora, his usually cold eyes wide with a raw, unfiltered panic. He grabbed her shoulders, his hands trembling slightly. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard before. "Nora, did he touch you?" "No. I'm okay," she whispered, her heart hammering as she looked up at him. In that moment, she realized he hadn't just protected his asset. He had protected her. When they returned to the penthouse that night, the adrenaline was still coursing through their veins. Dominic poured them both a drink, his hands still stained with faint traces of the scuffle. Nora walked over to him, taking a damp cloth to clean his knuckles. "You could have been killed," she said softly. Dominic looked down at her, the mask completely gone. "I wouldn't let anything happen to you, contract or no contract." The air between them grew heavy, charged with a magnetic tension they had been ignoring for months. Dominic reached out, his thumb tracing her lower lip. Nora didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, abandoning every rational thought, every rule on that cream-colored paper. When he kissed her this time, there were no cameras. There was no audience. There was only a desperate, consuming fire. He backed her against the marble counter, lifting her up, and the fake marriage died in the shadows of his bedroom. For the next 2 months, they were no longer playing a part. They were fiercely, undeniably in love. Dominic started talking about the future, real estate in Tuscany, walking away from the life. Nora finally felt safe. She finally felt like she belonged. Then came the second Tuesday in November. It was pouring rain. Dominic was running late from a sit-down in New Jersey. Nora was in the kitchen, humming softly, pouring a glass of wine, waiting for the heavy thud of the front door. When the private elevator pinged, she smiled and walked into the foyer. "You're late, Mr. Russo." The words died in her throat. It wasn't Dominic. Standing in the entryway, soaking wet, flanking by 2 of Dominic's most trusted guards, who looked utterly terrified, was a woman. She had sharp, aristocratic features, raven dark hair, and a designer trench coat dripping onto the Persian rug. Nora froze. The guards wouldn't look her in the eye. The woman stepped forward, her heels clicking ominously against the hardwood. She looked Nora up and down with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. "You must be the placeholder," the woman said, her voice dripping with venom. "Who are you?" Nora demanded, her pulse spiking. "How did you get up here?" The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a leather-bound folder, tossing it onto the foyer table. It slid open, revealing blood-stamped documents, old photographs, and a birth certificate. "I am Victoria Hastings," the woman said, her lips curling into a wicked smile. Dominic's real fiancée, the woman everyone thought died in a car bombing 3 years ago. Victoria tapped the documents with a perfectly manicured nail. "I see he didn't tell you. Dominic's empire, his money, the men he commands, they don't belong to him. They belong to my father. And according to the old laws, Dominic only gets to keep the throne if he marries me. So pack your bags, sweetheart. Your little game of house is over." Before Nora could speak, the elevator doors opened again. Dominic stood there, freezing in his tracks as his eyes locked onto Victoria. The color completely drained from the Mafia Boss's face. "Dominic," Nora whispered, her voice cracking, pleading for him to deny it, pleading for him to throw this stranger out. But Dominic didn't look at Nora. He looked at the woman who had returned from the grave. "Victoria," he breathed out, stepping out of the elevator. And in that single word, Nora's entire world shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The silence in the sprawling Fifth Avenue foyer was sudden and absolute, heavy enough to crush the air from Nora's lungs. Rain battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting jagged, watery shadows across the imported marble floor. Dominic remained frozen just outside the private elevator, his usually composed, ruthless demeanor completely shattered. His eyes were locked on Victoria Hastings, as if he were staring at an apparition summoned straight from the depths of hell. Victoria, dripping wet but maintaining the arrogant posture of a queen, offered a slow, deliberate smile. She tossed her wet coat to one of the trembling guards. "It is impolite to stare, Dominic. Aren't you going to welcome your bride home? I travelled a very long way from Geneva to reclaim what is rightfully mine." "You died," Dominic whispered, his voice sounding like tearing sandpaper. He took a hesitant step forward, ignoring Nora completely. "I saw the wreckage in Palermo. I identified the ring. You were in the car when the explosive detonated." "I was in the decoy car," Victoria corrected smoothly, stepping over to the foyer table to pour herself a drink from Dominic's crystal decanter. She moved around the penthouse as if she had never left, intimately familiar with every corner. "My father, Vincenzo, always taught me to stay one step ahead of the commission. I knew the Moretti faction was planning a hit, so I let them think they succeeded. I went underground. I allowed you to take the throne, to clean up the streets, to bleed and fight and rebuild the syndicate's wealth. And now that the hard work is finished, and the empire is expanding into legitimate international shipping, I have returned to take my seat beside you." Nora stood completely still, her heart shattering with a physical pain that radiated through her chest. She looked at Dominic, waiting for him to object, waiting for him to order his men to drag this woman out. She waited for the man who just hours ago had promised her a quiet life in Tuscany. But Dominic said nothing. His jaw was clenched, his slate-grey eyes darting between the leather-bound folder on the table and Victoria's triumphant face. "Dominic," Nora finally choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell her to leave." Dominic flinched at the sound of Nora's voice. He slowly turned his head to look at her, and the expression in his eyes broke her. There was no fire. There was no defiance. There was only a suffocating, paralyzing realization of defeat. "Nora," Dominic started, taking a step toward her, his hand reaching out. "You don't understand the laws of the commission. Vincenzo Hastings was the supreme head. His bloodline dictates the succession. If Victoria is alive, my claim to the empire, my protection, the loyalty of the 5 families, it all legally belongs to her." "I don't care about the 5 families," Nora shouted, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. "I care about you. We are married." Victoria let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She took a sip of her bourbon, staring at Nora with absolute contempt. "You signed a piece of paper, little archivist, a piece of paper that my lawyers have already proven fraudulent, considering my prior, unbreakable betrothal contract with Dominic, sanctioned by the commission itself. You are nothing but a temporary distraction. A civilian plaything he used to appease the old men who wanted him settled." "Is that true?" Nora asked, staring directly into Dominic's eyes, desperate for a denial. "Is she telling the truth?" Dominic closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his tight jaw. When he opened them, the cold, ruthless Mafia Boss had returned, completely masking the tender man she had fallen in love with. "Pack your bags, Nora. James O'Connell will transfer the $2 million into your offshore account tonight. Your father's debt remains forgiven. Our business arrangement is concluded." The words struck her like physical blows. Business arrangement. After the stolen kisses, the vulnerable late-night conversations by the fire, the way he had risked his life to shield her at the Pierre Hotel, he was throwing her away to keep his blood-soaked crown. Nora didn't argue. She didn't scream or throw things. The dignity she had maintained her entire life kicked in, shielding her from a complete breakdown. She turned on her heel, walked down the long, silent hallway to the master suite they had shared, and pulled her cheap canvas tote bag from the back of the closet. She didn't pack the Vera Wang gowns. She didn't take the cashmere coat he had bought her. She only took the clothes she had arrived with. When she walked back into the foyer 15 minutes later, Dominic was standing by the window, his back to her, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. Victoria was sitting on the velvet sofa, looking thoroughly bored. "Goodbye, Dominic," Nora said softly. He didn't turn around, but as the elevator doors closed, sealing her out of his world forever, Nora could have sworn she saw his shoulders violently shake. Over the next 4 weeks, Nora attempted to erase the Mafia Boss from her memory. She rented a small, run-down apartment in Astoria, Queens, far from the glittering lights of Fifth Avenue. She found a quiet job cataloging rare books at a small independent shop in Brooklyn. She changed her phone number and lived like a ghost, terrified that the shadows of her past would catch up to her. But the past was already growing inside her. It happened on a cold Tuesday morning. Nora was standing in the cramped bathroom of her apartment, staring at the 2 pink lines on the plastic stick sitting on the edge of the sink. She covered her mouth to stifle a sob, her knees giving out as she slid to the linoleum floor. She was pregnant. She was carrying the heir to the most dangerous crime syndicate on the East Coast. Panic seized her. If Victoria Hastings found out about the child, Nora would not survive the week. In the Mafia, bloodlines were currency, and an illegitimate child threatening Victoria's claim to the throne was a death sentence. Nora knew she had to run. She needed to pack whatever cash she had and disappear to the Midwest, change her name, and never look back. She frantically began throwing clothes into a suitcase when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through her small apartment. Nora froze. She hadn't ordered anything. She hadn't given anyone her address. She crept toward the peephole and looked through the distorted glass. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, wearing a sharp navy suit and looking entirely out of place in Queens, was James O'Connell, Dominic's ruthless corporate attorney. Nora hesitated, then slowly unlatched the deadbolt, keeping the chain engaged. "What do you want, James? The contract is terminated." "Miss Mitchell, please let me in," James said, his voice urgent, his eyes scanning the hallway. "I'm not here on Dominic's orders. I am here to save your life. You are in grave danger." Reluctantly, Nora unhooked the chain. James slipped inside, immediately closing and locking the door behind him. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope, tossing it onto her small dining table. "Victoria has ordered a hit on you," James said bluntly, wasting no time. "She discovered your location 3 days ago. She hired independent contractors from the Moretti faction to bypass Dominic's loyalists. They are coming tonight." Nora's blood ran cold. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach. "Why?" "I left. I took nothing. I'm completely out of their world." "Because," James said, his eyes dropping briefly to her abdomen, making it clear he already knew her secret. "Victoria is not simply reclaiming her throne. She is orchestrating a hostile takeover. She needs all loose ends tied up, and you, Nora, are the biggest loose end of all." "You need to leave right now," James insisted, pushing the heavy envelope toward her. "There is a private charter waiting at Teterboro Airport under the name Alice Vance. It will take you to London, and from there, a car will drive you to a secure estate in the Scottish Highlands. Do not pack anything. Just go." Nora's mind raced, terrified for the life growing inside her. But before she could even reach for the envelope, the sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway outside. James's face drained of color. "They're early." The front door exploded inward, the heavy wood splintering off its hinges. 3 massive men, dressed in dark, tactical gear, stormed into the tiny apartment, their weapons drawn and equipped with silencers. James dove behind the kitchen counter, pulling a small sidearm from his shoulder holster, but he was pinned down instantly by a hail of suppressed gunfire that shredded the drywall. Nora screamed, scrambling backward toward the fire escape window. One of the hitmen tracked her movement, raising his weapon, aligning the sight squarely on her chest. Suddenly, the glass of the front window shattered inward. A sleek, black grappling hook smashed through the pane, followed immediately by the terrifying, familiar silhouette of a man who moved like a phantom. Dominic Russo crashed into the room. He didn't look like the polished businessman in a Tom Ford suit anymore. He was wearing black tactical gear, his face streaked with rain and rage, wielding 2 customized Kimber 1911 handguns. Before the hitmen could even pivot toward the new threat, Dominic unleashed absolute hell. His movements were terrifyingly precise, a lethal ballet of violence. He dropped the first man with 2 shots to the chest. The second man turned, firing wildly, but Dominic slid across the floor, dodging the bullets and returned fire, striking the man precisely in the throat. The third hitman lunged with a tactical knife, but Dominic caught his arm, twisted it until the bone snapped, and drove the hilt of his gun into the man's temple, dropping him unconscious to the floor. The entire brutal exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. The apartment was eerily silent, save for the ringing in Nora's ears and the heavy breathing of the Mafia Boss standing amidst the carnage. "Dominic!" Nora gasped, pressing herself against the wall, her entire body trembling violently. Dominic dropped his weapons, rushing across the room. He fell to his knees in front of her, his hands frantically checking her face, her arms desperately searching for wounds. "Are you hurt? Nora, please tell me you're not hurt." I'm okay," she stammered, completely in shock. "What are you doing here? You chose her. You told me to leave." Dominic's expression crumbled into pure, agonizing regret. He gently cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I had to let you go. I had to make her believe she had won. If I had fought her in that foyer, if I had shown her how much you meant to me, you would have been dead before you reached the lobby." Nora stared at him, trying to process his words. "You knew she was going to kill me. I knew Victoria didn't just survive that car bombing," Dominic said, his voice turning cold and hard as steel. He stood up, pulling Nora to her feet. "I spent the last 4 weeks tearing apart her timeline in Europe. I found the financial trails. Victoria didn't just escape the Moretti hit 3 years ago. She orchestrated it." James O'Connell emerged from behind the ruined kitchen counter, brushing drywall dust off his suit. "He's right, Miss Mitchell. Victoria sold out her own father to the Moretti family in exchange for a massive payout. She faked her death, let Dominic bleed to secure the territory, and planned to waltz back in and take over the newly legitimized empire. But she made one fatal mistake," Dominic interrupted, his eyes burning with a fierce, possessive fire as he looked at Nora. "She thought I cared about the crown more than I cared about you." He pulled Nora into his chest, wrapping his arms around her tightly, burying his face in her hair. The night she arrived, I realized instantly what she was doing. I had to push you away to blind her. While she spent the last month celebrating her return, organizing galas at the Waldorf, and consolidating power, I spent the last month transferring every single dime of my legitimate assets into an irrevocable trust under your name. I dismantled the illegal operations. I handed all the evidence of Victoria's betrayal directly to Old Man Carmine and the Commission. Nora pulled back slightly, looking up at him in utter disbelief. You gave up the empire. You gave it all away. I burned it to the ground, Dominic corrected, a ruthless smile playing on his lips. 10 minutes ago, the commission paid a visit to Victoria at the penthouse. They don't take kindly to people who sell out their own blood to rival families. Victoria Hastings will never be a problem for us again. The empire is gone. The crown is shattered. I am officially a dead man in New York. He reached down, gently resting his large, calloused hand against Nora's stomach. His eyes softened, the ruthless Mafia Don entirely vanishing, leaving only the man who loved her. James told me about the pregnancy this morning. Did you really think I would let you run away with my child? Tears streamed down Nora's face, but this time they were tears of overwhelming relief. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder. He picked her up effortlessly, carrying her out of the ruined apartment and into the rainy New York night, leaving the shattered remnants of his violent past behind them. 2 months later, under the warm, golden sun of a private vineyard in Tuscany, a small, quiet wedding took place. There were no politicians, no underworld bosses, and no reporters. There was only a beautiful bride in a simple white dress, and a man who had traded his criminal empire for the only thing that truly mattered. When Dominic Russo kissed his wife this time, there were no contracts, no lies, and no shadows. There was only the promise of forever. Did this gripping tale of loyalty, betrayal, and unexpected love keep you on the edge of your seat? The criminal underworld is unforgiving, but true romance always finds a way to survive the crossfire. If you loved Nora and Dominic's thrilling journey, hit that like button, share this story with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding, twist-filled audio stories. Drop a comment below on what shocked you the most. See you all next time.